Hello everyone. Welcome to the cruel dystopian future that is Quasimorph, a humanity turned cold where profits outweigh life, demons have manifested into our reality, and walking down the wrong corridor can result in you being shot in the face. So today, we're going to embrace the chaos by becoming a mercenary for hire, and work for the many corporations that will pay us handsomely to commit atrocities on each other. Which means no one will question us when we blow someone's leg off, harvest their organs with the very bone we just removed, and cook them into delicious tinned food. So join me on my cruise around the galaxy, committing all kinds of crimes against humanity, all while we make pacts with demons, but most importantly, become rich. Before we go any further, this video is sponsored by Hype Train to celebrate the 1.0 release of Quasimorph after being in early access for a few years. It's a hell of a lot of fun, and I recommend you check it out. After completing the tutorial, which I almost failed by stepping on my own landmine, we were met with our ship. Right now it's not much, but later on we'll be able to upgrade it and make our lives a little easier. For now, its only use is to ferry us across the system, so I can accept jobs from the many corporations. There are many to choose from, and each one has their own unique theme and technology tree. For example, you have Rarr, the military-industrial complex, which I found has a real fetish for paying you in landmines. Not that that's a problem. But my personal favourite is the private prison that specialises in shotguns and suspiciously unlabeled canned meat products. Currently, the strongest faction is literal demons, or the Quasimorphs. Something we should probably do something about, but that's a later job. Anyway, after skimming through the list, I decided if I was going to haul myself out to anyone, it might as well be Rarr since they have a job here on Phobos. The job was to fend off some intruders from the Church of Revelation, a religious organization who were trying to steal some technology. So, I picked our operator, Francis, picked a range focus class, and then put together our loadout. A rusty shotgun, a knife, some food so we didn't starve to death, and with that, we were ready. Arriving onto the map, our goal was to assist in hunting down the church's infiltration teams. So I spent the next couple of minutes wandering about until I stumbled across a friendly marine standing next to a large puddle of blood. It looked like she didn't have any problems mowing down the intruders. The same, however, couldn't be said for the poor recruit around the corner. He had had both his head and leg ripped off, so naturally, I stole his stuff and continued exploring. What I was looking for was the last intruder, which didn't take long to find and introduced to our shotgun. After looting his corpse and stealing his lollipop, I made my way to the elevator so we could head down to the second floor. Our objective was to find and kill 6 more targets. Making my way down the corridor, I opened the door to find a small engagement between the two factions. While they shot each other, I helped myself to someone's armor before going around the corner and mopping up. However, firing a shotgun in an underground facility had clearly alerted everyone within, and more began to pile in from the door behind us. So I threw a flashbang and started decorating the room with their limbs, until I had eventually killed enough of them and completed our objective. With everyone dead, I thought I'd take a minute to have a little look around the facility, eat all the food in the vending machines, before making our way to the elevator and completing our mission. With our mission completed, Rarr paid us with 7 landmines, the same rusty assault rifle we had picked up earlier, and a production license for a jackhammer. Now back on our ship, I built our first upgrade, which will allow me to produce our own items. Unfortunately, I didn't have the stuff to build a jackhammer, but we could at least produce some meds. I then toyed with the idea of flying to another planet, but there were still a couple of missions here to do, including a story mission. The other was a contract from the Unchained Belt, a batch of unionized pirates who wanted me to kill someone. I saw this as the perfect opportunity to test out our new toys we got from Rarr, and it's safe to say, they were very effective. After blowing up the rest of the guards on the first floor, I made my way down to the second floor and continued my rampage by igniting a room on fire and then shooting the employees as they tried to escape. While wandering about looking for anything of value, I came across a stove, with one of the recipes being to create canned food for the low cost of an empty tin and 3 pieces of flesh. Looking around the kitchen, we had plenty of the latter, but no tins. Now, one small problem with consuming flesh is it has a chance of giving you an infection, and it also gets the Quasimorph slightly aroused. However, turning it into tinned food removes both these issues. Fortunately, we didn't have to deal with demons right now, because we were still orbiting the safe and cozy planet of Mars. But it was something we were going to have to deal with later. So I ran around the facility, digging through every trash can and vending machine, until we ended up with 3 cans and an alcohol addiction. Yeah, turns out something I thought was just food was actually alcoholic. Anyway, after butchering the former employees, we turned their flesh into tins of chunks and jelly, no longer giving us an infection when consumed, and apparently no longer making it an act of cannibalism. Nice. With my stockpile of food and crippling alcohol addiction, I made my way down to the final floor where the VIP was located. With some nasty debuffs, I hoped to just bait her into stepping on a mine and calling it a day. What actually happened is I walked round the corner, placed the mine, and immediately got shot and a Molotov thrown at my head. Now on fire, I panicked and began running down the corridor in a desperate attempt to get away from her, until I heard a familiar heartwarming sound. I think she's still alive. Peeping around the corner, she was in fact very dead. So, covered in burns, vomiting all over myself, I limped back to the elevator and completed the mission. Our reward for our struggles was an axe, more landmines, some gold, and a shot of morphine. Combined with everything we had looted from the facility, I'd say this was a very successful run. The pirates gained some power, we gained some reputation with them, and we also had some items to barter with. Because of our illegal activities, we're not allowed to trade on the open market, so we have to basically barter with each individual faction if we ever want to buy anything, which means we'll be checking the stock market a lot whenever we need to buy or sell something. But we'll worry about trading later on, because we still had a mission to finish. It involved attacking the Civil Resistance, a terrorist organization that relies on recruiting the poor and desperate to wage war against the corporations. Unfortunately for them, downing half a bottle of vodka and bringing a nail gun to a fight isn't exactly the smartest of strategies, unless your opponent is also using nail guns, but you just happen to have a bigger one. Yeah, I won't lie, it was a lot of fun running around and murdering them with their own weaponry, until they started bringing proper guns. Ow! After completing our objective, we returned to our ship where Jane mentioned we had found a database filled with information about Quasimorphosis, belonging to the Ancon Corporation. She advised that I should return it to them, because we don't really want to piss off one of the largest corporations in the system. I'll be honest, I was very close to handing it over to them, but then I thought, nah, fuck Ancon, let's instead troll the galaxy by giving it to the pirates, which meant it was time for a 33-day journey to a remote planet on the edge of the system. Upon arrival, however, both their stations were under attack, so this meant it was time for a defense mission. Defense missions can be relatively tricky, as you have to fend off hordes of attackers until the timer runs out. But unfortunately for them, I still had some landmines. Once I had completed the mission, I was able to interact with the station and give them the data. In return, they gave us a handful of slightly higher tier equipment, things like a silenced SMG, some pretty cool looking armor, and a pistol that fires a 12.7mm round. To test out our new equipment then, I accepted the other defense contract, and since this one was going to be a little harder, I also brought a turret, which ended up doing a majority of the heavy lifting, while I sat at the back blowing holes in people with my new pistol. I have to admit, I feel like I did a pretty good job on this defense, as the only thing left to identify the attackers were the small boxes of their belongings sitting in a puddle of blood. With everything we've done for them, it's safe to say that the pirates absolutely loved us. However, their position on the stock market left much to be desired. Not wanting my only friends to be the laughingstock of the corporate world, I decided that I was going to continue working for them, in hopes that a few successful missions will push them into the top half of the list. Plus, every mission I completed for them, they paid me in hard drugs and gold. Two things I didn't think would be terrible having a majority of our net worth in. But before we did that, I did a little bartering so we could unlock a couple more upgrades for our ship. One being a capsule we can cool down during a mission and fill with loot, and another being monitoring, which will allow us to scan for extra jobs. One being another infiltration mission, where I hit the attackers with our usual trick. Picking through the body parts, I found something called a Jeff Hammer, an automatic shotgun, which was a lot more effective than our rusty pump action I'd been using since the start of the game. So, throwing that rusty piece of crap away, this gun couldn't have come at a better time. With us no longer being on the safe and cozy moon that was orbiting Mars, people now had a chance of turning into a monster when they died. You may notice a number in the bottom right corner of the screen. As it gets higher, the stronger and more aggressive the Quasimorphs become, and if it hits 1,000, bad things happen. So, to avoid said bad things from happening, I made my way to the final floor, where Jane informed me that we had completed our objective. Obviously, we hadn't killed the intruders, and this should have been a good sign to leave. However, my curiosity outweighed my survival instinct, and I pressed on until the Quasimorphosis scale broke. allowing a Baron to spawn in, who proclaimed he was going to break me. Terrified, I ran to the elevator to try and escape, only to find that evac was unavailable. Yeah, that's right. I had to kill the Baron before I was allowed to leave. Panicking, I decided that the best course of action would be just to go up a floor and pretend that everything was okay. However, arriving on the second floor, we were met with a centaur. Fancying my chances, I emptied both weapons into it, only for it to still be standing. So in an act of desperation, I punched it in the face. Okay, I think we can all agree that was a terrible idea. But at least we still completed the mission and got paid. Thankfully, death isn't the end for our boy Francis, as we'll be able to clone another. It did, however, mean we had to say bye-bye to all his gear and all the levels we had gotten in his skills. Cloning was also going to take a few days, so in the meantime, we might as well check out some of the others we had at our disposal. One who caught my eye was Isabella, who specializes in ignoring infections, which, if you remember, is one of the problems of consuming human flesh. This paired well with the melee class because of a little something called cannibalism. Naturally, I gave her a jackhammer, a knife, and let her loose on some poor employees, who, once we had crushed them, we chopped up with our knife and repeated the cycle. One small problem, the decapitation and consumption of the poor really got the demons riled up. And even after trying to keep them at bay by pumping an aggressive amount of morphine into myself, it wasn't enough. Admitting that this had now become a one-way mission, I ate a disturbing amount of human skin before hurrying over to the objective. Making it to the supply cache, all I had to do was destroy it. Something I didn't realize though, was that they explode. So yeah, I might have accidentally blown myself up. But hey, we still completed the mission. And in what I can only assume was some kind of sick joke, they paid us in explosive tin cans. Anyway, after completing a couple more contracts, I'd received an objective to complete 5 robberies for the pirates. The first was an absolute breeze. I walked through the entire map, gunning people down without really taking any damage. But that overconfidence quickly got me humbled when during the next one, I found myself trapped in a tiny room. Hiding behind a vending machine, I desperately fended off the waves of guards until I thought I had survived the initial onslaught and tried to push out, only for one of them to run round the corner and place a turret in my face. Yeah, you can probably guess what happened next. This was then followed by me walking down the corridor in the next mission and just getting shot in the face. Yeah, sometimes that just happens. Okay, if I was actually going to finish these robberies, I had to lock the fuck in. So, I got to grips with proper AP management, bringing multiple damage types, and actually doing a little bit of research against the people we're going to fight. Once I had started doing all that, things started to go a lot smoother for us, and I managed to finish up the last few robberies without too many issues, unlocking a story mission called the Ship of Ghouls. The premise of which is to simply steal the HIS Woodpecker. Simple, right? However, this mission is fucked. But I had absolutely no idea how difficult this was going to be, so I went in thinking nothing of it. Boy was I in for a surprise when I opened the door and was met with a heavily armed flame trooper who covered both me and the entire room in napalm. By sheer chance, I just happened to bring 2 bottles of water, allowing me to extinguish myself and carry in the smoke on 24 HP. Once I had composed myself, I spent about 5 minutes in a heated firefight, desperately fighting off the guards. This should have been my wake-up call, as they were all using far superior weapons and armor. But it wasn't. Anyway, I progressed through the first floor and made my way down to the armory. Our objective from here was to destroy the server rack. However, I never made it, as I bumped into another group of guards, one of which brought a gun that fires saw blades and cut my arm off. Bleeding, missing 2 body parts, and outnumbered, I tried to run away, but I was cut down. And it's at this point you're probably thinking, did I maybe realize that I was wildly under-equipped for this mission? Nope. Instead, I put together another kit, loaded in, and was immediately murdered by a jar of bees. Okay, this really should have been my wake-up call. However, what preceded was about 4 if not 5 hours of me repeatedly dying on this mission. Over and over again, I loaded into the mission and pretty much died before completing the first objective. I was shot, electrocuted, burned, dismembered, electrocuted again, and it got to the point where I'd used all my good equipment, and I was just sending in naked clones with low-tier guns. Yeah, unsurprisingly, this didn't work either. After a day's recording of me getting my ass beat, I did finally manage to make a bit of progress. I cleared out the first floor, made it to the arsenal, and destroyed the server rack. But while I was making my way back to the elevator, I may have broken the Quasimorphosis bar and spawned a Baron. Unfortunately for him, he wasn't as scary as these fuckers, and I also had an assault rifle. His death dropped his skull, or pact, which if consumed would give me powerful abilities, according to Jane. Pressing on, we made our way to the engine rooms, and were informed that the company that owns the ship had sold it to the Differy Corporation, and they were now sending people to kill us. Our objective now was to defend the engines by clearing the rest of the floor. With friends by my side, I may have gotten a little overconfident, took a shot at one of the Quasimorphs, which then instantly killed me. Brilliant. Defeated, upset, and honestly exhausted from getting my ass kicked all day, I finally admitted to myself that we couldn't do it. Because from what I understand, there are 4 stages to this mission, and we couldn't even get past the 3rd. Mostly because of these things. As a consequence of me dying repeatedly, my armory was completely drained. So, when I accepted a mission to defend against a horde of Quasimorphs, I would have loved to see the defenders' faces when my PMC stepped off the ship naked and armed with only a nail gun and a shovel. Yeah, as you have probably guessed, it didn't end very well. Getting absolutely wrecked on the story mission had made me realize that I should maybe experiment with some different builds, especially because I had unlocked a large list of clones and classes, but I was still just using the first one. So I toyed with the idea of being a pyromaniac. The premise was simple: set the entire map on fire and watch everyone burn to death. Something that worked great until I realized I was fighting a robotics company, and they just walked through the fire and beat me to death. So going into the next raid, I made sure to bring a backup weapon. However, I then decided that the best tactic would be to set the enemy on fire and then charge through the flames and beat them to death with a shovel. While on the topic of experimenting, I thought I'd try a handful of others, starting with Nico, who got a bonus for using pistols. So, the premise is simple: bring 3 pistols, all with different purposes. One for sneaking about, one for blowing big old holes in people's armor, and another for when things go wrong. Another was running around naked and throwing axes at people. Yeah, probably could have used a little more imagination for that one, but hey, it kinda worked until it didn't. Another really good one was using Jacques, who has a 1-turn reload, and giving him 2 heavy machine guns and an RPG. Yeah, this one was really fun, and if you're poor, you can replace the HMG with a nail gun. And finally, I played as a sniper. Yeah, that one was good as well. Unfortunately, the last 2 were recorded much later on, so for now, my build ended up right where we started, using Francis with a similar kit to our pistol build: sneaky gun, loud gun, but this one with an electric pistol, something that works really well because it doesn't require ammo, and his perk gives you bonus weapon durability. With my new loadout, I thought I was ready to attempt the Ship of Ghouls mission again. This time, however, I had a trick up my sleeve, and that being an army of sex bots. With 6 bots deployed, I was filled with confidence until one of the defenders must have anticipated this exact situation and threw a grenade into the room, killing them all. No! Even with that tragic start, I managed to pull myself together and fought my way through the first floor, destroyed the server rack on the second, and made my way to the engine room. Once I had cleared this floor, all I had to do now was clear out the command deck. This, however, is where things started to go wrong, as I found myself ground down fighting an endless wave of Quasimorphs in this corridor, until, well, I was electrocuted. Honestly, I hate these fucking things. So, I think it's time to admit, this mission can go screw itself, and instead we're going to fly over to Venus and kill as many Quasimorphs as possible. Something that was going to be a little bit of a challenge, because they were currently the strongest faction in the system. With a majority of their assets on Venus, I headed over to discover they were locked in an endless war with the private prison sector, and judging by the balance of power, I'd say they were winning. I don't know why the private prison sector was waging war with the Quasimorphs, but I can only assume they had ran the numbers and found a profit somewhere. So if I was going to have a chance of beating any of these contracts, it was time to change up our tactics again. With a majority of their units being melee, I didn't think it would be a terrible idea to bring our boy Pyro Percy out of retirement. Something that proved to be a good decision because we could just create a wall of fire and shoot anything that tried to cross. The next couple of contracts then, I just ran around the map setting everything on fire. This got the attention of a Quasimorph Duchess called Xiomara. Satisfied with the orgy of violence I had been committing, she wished to make a pact with me. Now you may remember I had made a pact with our boy Francis when I killed that Baron during the Ship of Ghouls quest. but its ability was pretty weak and I never used it. This one, however, dealt damage to a target and would turn them into a spider if they died. Forming the Unbreakable Pact with Xiomara created another faction called the Feathered Masks. She gave me this big spiel about how the king had become old so corrupt and together we could oppose them, but initially I didn't really care. I was just there to kill demons out of spite. Something I had gotten down to an art. I was still running my Percy build, but I had found an implant that made us immune to fire damage, meaning I could walk into a room, set the entire thing ablaze, and stand there while the demons melted around me. Something that became easier when the prison started paying us in Dragon's Breath, incendiary shotgun ammo, which was just as effective as our flamethrower. After a handful of contracts, we had completely dismantled their control over the galaxy, and replaced them with the Feathered Masks. I'm not really sure if this was a good thing, because all I had done is replace one Quasimorph faction with another, but hey, at least they were friendly with us, and we were now rich. Kinda. I had completed a majority of the ship upgrades, one of them being the trade shuttle, which allowed me to sell anything I picked up in missions, including the disturbing amount of mutated arms the Feathered Mask kept paying us with. But there was still one more thing we could do before calling it. One of the ship upgrades would allow me to commence a hostile takeover of one of the minor corporations. So after running around and picking up all the required items, I set my sight on my good friends over at the prison. Don't get me wrong, they probably weren't the best target as their power ranking was rock bottom, but I developed a soft spot for them during our struggles against the Quasimorphs. So commencing the hostile takeover, I found the location of their CEO and blasted him in the face with 3 rockets. Sadly, this caused the company to lose a lot of power, but it wasn't like they could have been any worse. With the company under new ownership, I could now steer it in my own direction and had access to all their resources. Not that I really needed them at this point, but it was a nice gesture. With that, I think I'm happy to leave it. We had solidified the Feathered Masks as a dominant faction, taken over our own corporation, and killed about 3,800 people in the process. There is a quest line to destroy the other Quasimorph faction, but I'm happy to leave them as a pathetic reminder of what they once were. But I did go back and complete the Ship of Ghouls quest. Yeah, turns out it's actually really easy, and if you struggle, you must be bad at the game or something. Anyway, I have to admit, even though this was a sponsored video, I thoroughly enjoyed playing Quasimorph, and plan on playing a lot more, whether that's outside of content, or maybe even a stream or two. So if you enjoyed the video and want to see more, give this video a like. With that said, thank you for watching, thank you to Hype Train for sponsoring this video, and thanks to the people who throw money at me. And as always, new video.